Good evening, everyone. I am Yang Yan Zhao here tonight. Very special episode, capping off an epic week. Just for anybody who's new, why don't you give me a sub every week or most weeks? Try to have someone talking about gaming, storytelling, comic books, art. We have it all. Lots of great guests. And tonight is absolutely no exception. We have a guest who is leaving the speakeasy, and tonight we will be speaking hard as we have a longtime game player, commentator on state of the industry, and overall fun guy. So today we have Kyle. How's it going, man?
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me on. Yeah. Appreciate
So,
that. I'm not leaving the speakeasy before anybody gets there because I think I misheard that or something. But it's like, no, I'm not leaving the speakeasy.
Well, you're stepping outside the speakeasy tonight.
I'm for one night only, one show only,
one show only. So, thanks everyone for tuning in. Kyle, I gotta ask. My new favorite question. What is the best tabletop role-playing game? Whatever that means to you, what's the best?
Oh, wow. I didn't see that coming. The best. I mean, that's entirely subjective, right? I mean, I
yes.
can say what I think.
Absolutely.
My personal favorite is actually I've got it right here. Is probably Lamentations of the Flame Princess.
Ooh,
that's my personal favorite for a number of different reasons. But essentially, I mean, when you get right down to it, that's just basic D&D. You know, it's a retro clone, essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think in a more general sense, the best is probably Dungeons and Dragons. If you want me to be specific, I would say Advanced First Edition Dungeons and Dragons. That's what I grew up on. That was my first introduction to the game. And back in 1979, late 79, it was almost 1980, but that's when I started. And so there's a certain nostalgia factor there for me. You know, it's like driving a car, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the first time you learned it, like your first car when you're 16 or whatever, there's a fondness there that, you know, even if it was crappy, you know, you're like, yeah, but man, it was the best, right? So everybody's going to have their own personal takes. I love a lot of games though, and I love a lot of different games. I went through my Vampire the Masquerade phase in the 90s, along with everybody else in, you know, the RPG space. Call of Cthulhu is a fun game. I've played some Gamma World. I never got to play Top Secret. I owned that. That one always intrigued me because I like espionage and spy thrillers and things like that. So I mean, I'm not a one-trick pony as far as games are concerned. However, Dungeons and Dragons, it's the flagship. It's the name everybody recognizes. It's the Coca-Cola of the industry, right? Everybody's heard of it. Mm-hmm. And so and for that reason, I say it's the best, simply because, I mean, it has that sort of, what I want to say. It's the, you know, it's recognizable. Everybody knows it. So be my answer to that, I think.
Nice. So you mentioned you started playing with AD&D 1E. What got you into gaming in the first place?
I was weird and didn't have any friends. I mean, that's kind of a flippant answer, but on a certain level, it's true. When I was very young, my parents divorced, and my mom moved us to the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area. And coming from the Kansas City area in general, when you go down there, this is back in the day when everybody in Texas is like, oh, another damn Yankee, right? So I was kind of a social outcast in a certain way. I didn't really know anybody, but I met these, you know, I met the other weird kids, the social pariahs, and one of them talked about this game, and he's like, "Yeah, we get to put together and play D&D." I'm like, "I don't know what that is." "And what, Dungeons and Dragons?" Never heard of it. I came from a small farming town, you know, in the Midwest, and so they were like, "Well, you should come play with us." So I went over, and I don't even remember these cats' names, right? It's like it was that long ago, and I never developed a really close friendship with any of them. But that was my first introduction to it. And we, you know, like everybody else back then, it was this sort of mishmash of, we were kids. We didn't understand that, you know, basic D&D, the old Aero Lotus cover, you know, this one, right? That we didn't understand like basic and advanced. We were thinking, oh, you go basic and then you go advanced, right? But it was actually, they were almost two different product lines, and some of the rules were different, things like that. But we didn't understand all that at the time. We just, and luckily everything's pretty compatible. So that was my first experience with it. And so I went over there, and there's these weird looking dice, you know. The only dice I'd ever seen before were like Monopoly dice, right? 600 D6s. That's all I'd ever seen. I'd never seen a 20-sided die. I'm like, this die has 20 sides. This is crazy. And then, you know, the character, you know, they had to explain everything to me. And it took a little bit of time for me to realize that this is literally an open-ended game where you can do anything, that there's rules, but that as far as what your character can do and the things that they can attempt, and remember, this is old school, so it's not as confined as it is now in some ways. You know, if I'm a fighter, it's like, yeah, you can try to grab the rope and swing across the chasm. You know, it's who knew?
Sure, give it a go.
Yeah, and then later on, we relocated from the Dallas side more towards the Fort Worth side, and that's where I really made one of my close friends back in those days, a guy named Mitch. And I was the quintessential chubby nerd, and he was the tall, thin, gangly nerd. And you know, we were like the Laurel and Hardy of the junior high, you know. But that's really, his brother was the DM, and that's really where I gained my chops in D&D, because we played almost every weekend. And it was, his brother was not, I wouldn't say he was an adversarial DM, but he didn't pull any punches, right? Whereas the other group, it was
evil.
Yeah, the other group was you know, my first group was much more free form, and you're just kind of rolling dice and having fun. You know, I want to hit the orc. You know, this guy was running an actual dungeon. It was like we were looking for traps. We were doing all the things. You know, mapping. You know, tracking torches. You know, and that sort of thing. So
it's funny you mentioned mapping. I think that's something that's sort of gotten lost in.
Oh, I agree.
In modern day, like, you know, I'm running test groups for my campaign guide, and like, you know, if I don't have a graphical map up for them, they don't know where they are. They would walk around in circles forever.
Maybe they should get a mapper. get some old school graph paper and a pencil, right? I do think that that's something that's lost. And you know, a lot of people are like, yeah, man, I just don't want to, you know, and you got to sit there, and the DM's got to describe the room 3 times in order for me to get this right, and blah, blah, blah. But I think that it adds to the overall experience. If you want immersion, I think that that's one way that, or at least it assists in immersion, right? It's like you're actually exploring something, and you don't know, like you said, you don't know where the heck you are. And so, well, wait a minute, this corridor, you know, this goes right and that goes left, and okay, this is 20 feet. Well, I mean, that's the sort of thing when you think about people that were, even if you look at history with people like in the 20s, when there was sort of this I don't know, rampage archaeology going on where dudes would just be like, I'm an archaeologist, and they just go to Turkey and start digging stuff up, you know.
Yep.
There was still, you know, they didn't really have any credentials. They were just like, oh, I'm going to go find some treasure. And they were glorified treasure hunters is what they were. But even they did keep records, and they would like, okay, this is the site, and map this out. And here's this ancient city, and here's these rooms. And I mean, I think it adds overall to an immersive experience. I really, really do. It's sad that it's been lost, but at the same time, digital age and progress, and you know, it's so much easier to just throw down a map in front of people and get on with the game. So I get both ways, but I think people that don't map in their games, particularly live sessions, I try it sometime. I think you're missing out.
Yeah, I'm very guilty of that for my Friday night Gamma World games, where I am not the DM. I am often very confused where we are.
It's
I'll let the others figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was just the generation I was in or just a sign of the times, but you know, it wasn't a digital age back then. We're talking 79, right? I mean, the personal computers were, I mean, well, they were out there, but really only the rich kids had those. And, you know, you were lucky if you had an Atari 2600 and you were playing Space Invaders on it and stuff. And just in my life, just to see how technology, how far it's progressed just in my lifetime is absolutely amazing. But I think we were more suited towards a sort of theater of the mind kind of game back then, because not everything was visual all the time. I mean, I can remember listening to old radio serials, you know, The Shadow, you know, The Shadow Knows and all that kind of thing, sometimes on radio. And when you have radio, it's audio, but you're creating a picture in your mind as it goes along. And even TV, you know, we didn't have a color TV set until 1980, I think, or 81. So the world's changed.
Yeah, I think it was actually a lot of the gaming companies themselves, because, you know, once TSR started including maps with things, I think that's where it sort of spread to there, because then everything had to have a map. Like I even remember I couldn't find anyone to play D&D back when I was young, like late 80s, early 90s. But for some reason, Marvel superhero role-playing game that TSR came out with,
right.
You know, people would play that, and they had maps. It came with maps in the box that you got with it. So, you know, even then, so like for me, there was never a time without them. So I think in some ways that like colors my views, where I actually have to intentionally think like, oh yeah, I gotta make a map, and then it's like, oh, but I haven't been paying attention, so I don't know where it is now.
I start somewhere, right?
Exactly.
There's always been, I mean, at least at the time I started, there were always maps, at least of the dungeon, right? And then you had hex maps for the surrounding, but they were very, it was, and that's the thing that, and Gary Gygax talks about this in the first edition DMG at one point, that the accuracy of the map isn't as important as just the ability to use it. And what I mean by that is, well, I'll give you an example. You go to Google and you go to Google Earth, right? And you got your top-down view, and it shows every little, there's this building, and here's this water tower, and blah, 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 and all this. And that's an accurate representation, or a more accurate representation of the landscape. But then if you open up the old Rand McNally, or you go to something like a MapQuest or a Waze, and what's it show you? It's like, well, here's these roads, here's your major buildings, and that's more or less it, right? Rivers, railroad crossings, that kind of thing. But it just filters the information, and so one is more useful as a map to me for a person wanting to go where I want to, you know, to get from point A to point B than the other. And I think that's important when you're talking about a dungeon map. If a player is mapping a dungeon and they get the measurement wrong, and they put the corridors 50 feet and it's actually 60 feet. Is that really that consequential to things? The main purpose of a map, and this speaks to the immersive part of it, was for the ability for the players to get in and get out, because getting out was just as important as getting in. You didn't go into the dungeon, fight the big bad, and then everybody lives happily ever after, and you hand wave the getting out part. It's like, you know, you've got 6 torches. When you use up 3 of them, do you turn around and go back? Because not everybody had dark vision, right? Or infravision back in those days.
Exactly. That's one of my pet peeves with both versions of 5e, dark vision. But
well, yeah, I think they were streamlining things, because I do think that there was I think there were a lot of the developers of 5e and a lot of the people at WotC are looking at things. They're like, what do people really want? Mm-hmm. And I think that they looked back on those times, and I'm sure they've gotten feedback. They had to have gotten feedback, right?
Yeah.
I would hope so, that they've done some sort of studies or some sort of market research and figured out people really don't like mapping. They don't like keeping track of torches. They don't like spreadsheets for encumbrance. And so we're just going to kind of streamline a lot of that. And because people want to be heroes and fight monsters. I don't know if that's true. I mean, I like the grit personally. I really do.
I mean, well, with the exception of mapping, like all of that other stuff is still there in the 2014 version. If you actually read the DMG, it's there. It's just for whatever reason, people ignored it. Like it's something that I noticed when I started playing 5th edition. I got in with a group like 2017, and there were all sorts of things like, you know, dark vision. Basically, you could just always see in the dark no matter what. And then like, you know, drinking a potion only took a bonus action, whereas it really states in I believe both the player's handbook and the DMG that it should be a regular action. So that stuff was there, but it's just something with the people playing it. Like that stuff just gets pushed to the side, sort of like in Monopoly. You know, if you land on free parking, you're not supposed to get the money in the middle. Nothing happens, but just everybody plays, you get the money. So I don't know how, but like organically it all started happening like that.
I honestly don't have any idea how it organically started either. I assume that's very much like a lot of things, as the fan base increased over time, certain commonalities started coming up, and it just kind of attached itself to the hobby. Maybe, I don't know. It's like the free parking thing you're talking about in Monopoly. You know, when I was a kid, we played Monopoly. I think I was almost 20 years old before I realized that you didn't put money in the free parking space, right? That was a house rule, but it was so common, everybody I knew played that way. So I think that there's a lot to be said for that sort of thing occurring in the RPG space, particularly D&D too.
So, you know, speaking of different audiences, I noticed it was yesterday or the day before, you got into a bit of a discussion about railroading. So what does railroading mean to you?
Well, this is, what does it mean to me? Okay, I'll give you my definition of railroading. It is, let me gather my thought here for just a second. So railroading is when the player agency has no effect on the game world. In other words, the consequences of player actions are negated. So what I'm getting at is essentially the DM has a story in mind. This is going to be the final result, and there is no deviation. And regardless of how hard the players try to move things or change things, or they do something outside the box that would maybe naturally steer the conclusion in a different direction, the conclusion remains the same. It is not And this is where the real argument comes into play, because everybody kind of has a definition of what railroading is, and it's a little different for each person, because some people say, you won't allow me to play a gnome, that's railroading, because I don't have any agency now, or you've reduced my agency, right? I disagree with that, because I think that having structure and rules at the beginning, it doesn't, that's just the structure and the rules, right? It doesn't change whether or not your PCs can affect the game world. You know, and one of the examples I think I used in a comment was chess. If chess is very structured, the bishop can only move this way, and the knight moves like this, and the rook does this, and there's limitations on this. But the conclusion is not a foregone one, right?
Right.
I mean, so the choices that each player makes on each side of the chessboard do matter. Now, does that mean it's completely open-ended? Yes and no. No, not really, because there are limitations on it. But that doesn't. But I don't equate that with railroading. I think if you want to go to a video game example, I'd use Skyrim, because everyone says, "Oh my God, it's a complete open sandbox." Well, no, it's really not.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very open, and the boundaries are very, very wide. But that game's on rails. It's totally on rails. They're just very well hidden, and you have a lot of different choices, and you can affect things throughout the game. There's different courses of action you can take, and you don't even have to engage with the main storyline. If you want to ignore being the Dragonborn, you can do that. But there's still rails there, but the boundaries are so broad that you get that sense of an open world, a sandboxy kind of thing. And I honestly, my personal opinion is, I think that's probably, I don't know if it's the best kind of game to play, but it's certainly a really good example of how a game should be done. I mean, if somebody talked about in a comment that if the players want to open up a taco stand and they're just doing tacos in the city or whatever, I don't want to remove their agency. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to remove the player agency, but come on, dudes, there's a dragon 3 miles away tearing up the countryside, and he's got a lot of treasure, and he's evil. You don't want to. You want to sell tacos. Okay, I don't get it, but
to me, that was the whole issue with the barista module from a couple of years ago. Like, hey, if that's the game you want to play, okay, I'm not gonna tell you not to. I'm not gonna DM that game, and I'm not gonna play at your table. But go for it.
For all my polarizing content and bluster on the internet, at some point I think it's wise for people to realize that a lot of that is performance and showmanship.
Yeah.
And it's an unfortunate state of social media in particular that people seldom get recognized if they're middle of the road,
Yeah.
The well-behaved women seldom make history sort of quote, that sort of thing, right? And so that's how you get attention. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that I lie. And as far as the coffee house adventure that you're talking about, the Starbucks barista adventure, it's like, honestly, in my personal opinion, if you and your table, if that's what you want to play, more power to you, honestly. I mean, as long as you're having fun, I think that's really the ultimate goal. But I do think that at least I'm more of a traditionalist, and so and I think part of that's my age. Part of that's the things that I've been exposed to, particularly fantasy fiction, science fiction, and a lot of the because I was the weird kid. I was reading all that strange stuff, weird tales, just like the shirt says.
Yeah.
And people, I kind of lost my train of thought there. See, I'm getting old.
But it's interesting you say that, because I've been having discussions with people about like different aspects of the game. And just I think in players' handbooks, dungeon master guides, and when you're writing different campaign guides or modules, like I sort of think you need to spell things out more than before. So like, in my campaign guide, I have like guides for how people should play religious characters. Um, because most people play a cleric with all the enthusiasm. You're telling people like, oh yes, I worship his
Yeah.
lordship,
Lady Sunshine
Farquaad
or
or
whatever.
something.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and they say it with all the enthusiasm of telling people you're in a Tuesday night bowling league. Um, so like I've come up with, I have 4 areas in my guide that I mentioned. If you're creating a god or if you're playing a religious based character, you got to have prayer, service to others, which is like how your religion relates with the world, like Christianity, the food banks and helping people out and that kind of stuff. And some kind of tithe. So you have to pay money. It's absolutely ridiculous that a wizard's got to pay like, 50 or 100 gold to put a new spell in his book, but clerics just get everything. And then acts of devotion, like things you do for your god, like tattoos or branding, or you go on secret quests for your god or whatever. Like if you have those 4 areas, then the playing is much more fulfilling. But I think that people today generally don't go to church, not like they did back in 1974. And if you didn't go to church, your neighbors probably went to church, and a lot of the people you associated with did. So even if you weren't doing it yourself, you would understand how being part of a religious organization would work just by osmosis. So I think younger people don't think of it this way. So you sort of have to explain it a little more. And I think a lot of other areas of the games, like you have a lot of modules and whatnot based on like Conan and Pulps and Moorcock and all this stuff. They don't know. They might know Conan, but they don't know any of the other stuff. So you sort of have to be a little more heavy-handed with like, hey, the point of this is that, like the point of having slaves, entering like a slaving village is not that we want to promote slavery. It's that we want to fight the righteous fight against it.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think there has been some sort of generational shift for the bulk of human history. In fact, pretty much up until about the 60s and 70s. Religion, regardless of what creed it was, was an integral part of every human being's life. There was a sort of acknowledgement of the divine and the sacred, and everyone engaged in either worship or some sort of submission to it. And we can see it very much, at least up until maybe, honestly, you could go back and you could say Rene Descartes kind of changed things. But up, so that would 1700s. But I mean, it was just part of life. I mean, there wasn't really that much separation, But we've become a very separated society from it. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it certainly has changed the landscape as far as people's connection to it and how they perceive those things. And I think you bring up a very good point. Old school AD&D, it was one of the things. Tithing was a big aspect for a cleric in first edition AD&D. Yep. It's like they had to do it, 10% minimum. If you're playing, if you were really playing your cleric, you'd be given more than that. Paladins were not allowed to retain any treasure or magic items except for their own immediate use, essentially, right? And they had to tithe and they had to perform, acts. And when they're, when their church called or their deity called, okay, you're going on this quest, right? You don't say no to God, kind of
Exactly.
thing. And so, or if you do, it doesn't turn out well. And so, I think you're right. I think there is some sort of generational shift there, where maybe people, maybe I'd never really thought about that, but yeah, I guess people probably don't really understand or connect with that on that level anymore. It's something they have to put more thought behind, rather than it just kind of being just that's just the way things are, kind of a natural sort of state.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing I noticed playing 5e with different people. Like, they never really did a whole lot of anything with their cleric. Like, you get stuff in your cleric's kit, like incense and an alms bowl, and other various stuff. And it's weird, because I really weirded people out when I started playing. I had a monk that I ran like a Jehovah's Witness, where he was always trying to get people to like sign up to his beliefs and stuff.
Trying to convert people. Yeah,
exactly.
Going door
And
to
then
door.
like later I played a cleric, where every time they had off time, he would go into the village and use whatever lay of hands he had left to heal the sick and whatever for his god. And like, people were just kind of weirded out, which I thought was strange. And even in my test groups, like I have a dwarf who worships this goddess. She's the goddess of the harvest and life. And they're in a spot where they win a tournament and they get to ask a god a question. But little do they know, it turns out, in order to ask a god a question, they put people into a giant brass ram and heat it up, and then the screams as they die turn into the god's voice. And so I forgive the first time, because there were three.
This went dark really quick, man.
It's a dark campaign guide, but there's like 3 tiers, right? And so they watched it happen to the first one, because they didn't win the first tier. And before the second one, they could have said like, no, we don't want to take any part of this. But the paladin, he said, well, when in Rome. Of course I had to cut his powers off until he had to complete a quest for his goddess. But that's the kind of thing, is like, I see, with religion, and then with alignment, I just see like people just doing whatever's easiest, as opposed to like, well, if I were, this kind of a person, I'm pretending to be this kind of a person for 3 hours. What would this kind of person do?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I could add anything to that or not. I think that's a good summation. I think that the one caveat to that would be, playing the chaotic neutral or chaotic evil thief, and that whole "it's what my character would do" shtick. That trope that you hear so much about. The guy that's basically, he's using it as an excuse to be a jerk. I do think that the game originally, there was an assumption that the players, and this is actually, I kind of regathered my thought from earlier, the players are going to work cohesively as a group to do something. At least on some level, there's going to be some sort of party cohesion, right? You need to work together. You need to make the game enjoyable for everybody. If the thief is running around backstabbing the other PCs and taking their loot, it might be fun for the thief, but it's not a whole lot of fun for the other people. And so you've got to figure out a way to balance that between what exactly would my character do and what would my character do that benefits this game. So I think that there's a line there that needs to be walked in. It's also, there was a player investment towards, this is the situation. The dragon's terrorizing the countryside. We're going to go slay the dragon and get its treasure. And people were it was like, that was the assumption. It wasn't like, well, you can do anything you want, so we're going to go make a taco stand. That was not, or be a barista, right? Well, that's not the underlying assumption there. We came together as a group to play this game, and we're going to, fight evil and slay monsters. and so you kind of, there's a player investment there that was, it was expected. It was like, well, this is where, I guess taco stands can be fun, but this is not why I brought everybody over to my house on Saturday night. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, I kind of detracted from your point there. So I'm sorry.
No, I agree with that. And the chaotic neutral chaotic thing, chaotic evil thing kind of cheeses me off too, because generally people who act like a-holes, they don't have a whole lot of friends. So like, let's say you do want to play a chaotic evil thief, like you can do evil actions, but you're not gonna, well, A, you might not do them in front of the party, and B, you're probably not going to direct them at the party just because you want to get along. Like psychopaths, they need people. So
Right.
to the extent that they need you, they're not going to like screw you over, at least to your face, because they know they'll get kicked out of
Right.
whatever friend circle or punched or whatever.
Yeah. The sociopath might look at someone and they simply see them as an object to be used, but they
Yeah,
also understand the value of how to use that object. They don't just, like you said, they're not a jerk.
yeah,
That out, they're very self-serving. They're going to use that to their advantage, and so that means that they're
sure.
going to restrict their actions and the things that they say in particular ways. And I actually, it reminds me of, have you ever met somebody and for the first time and you're like, yeah, seems like a decent person, kind of nice, I kind of like them, and then 3 months later the crazy comes out?
Yeah.
You know what I
Many
mean?
ex-girlfriends. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure everybody's had that experience at some point or another. And so I really think that's a good way of looking at that, because these people that you meet, if they're just absolutely bonkers and crazy and off their rocker, and they do mean stuff, and they know how to disguise it, right? They understand, they don't operate within the social norms, but they understand the social norms enough
Yeah.
that they can fake it, even if it's just for a short time.
Yeah.
I think
And
that's a good way of looking at it.
yeah, and people who are absolutely like random murder hobos in real life, they tend to get locked up or murdered. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
so don't expect longevity for your character. But no, they look at people like I look at my car. My car is just a thing, but I treat it well because I need it to go places.
Yeah.
So I had a question, sort of on this topic. What do you think about alignment? So there's plenty of games, Gamma World, Call of Cthulhu, where there is no alignment, but in D&D there is. Do you think it needs to be updated for the times to make it more clear how things should be run, or is it better just to scrap it? And I've had other people like, you don't pick your own alignment. The DM will assign you an alignment based on your actions. So
Oh,
where do you sort of
okay.
fall in that?
Um, I respect alignment, and I understand why it was put into the game. A lot of people, alignment was heavily inspired by Michael Moorcock's Eternal Champion stuff, where there was this sort of cosmic, on a grand philosophical and cosmic scale, there was a battle between law and chaos. It wasn't necessarily good and evil; it was law and chaos, which is why in the old original basic D&D, the alignments were law, neutral, and chaos. And so what alignments represent there in basic is this sort of, some people are fully invested in the cosmic battle. I believe in law, or no, freedom is key, even if it's evil, and so I support chaos. The vast majority of people are neutral. They don't give a crap, right? It's like, I'm trying to farm my potatoes and get them to market so that my children don't starve this winter, right?
Right.
I mean, that's their level of thinking. Other people, like your clerics and your paladins, or your, you know, evil characters or whatever, they're more invested in that sort of battle. Now that got changed later on into Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons originally had a 5-point alignment system. So you had lawful good, chaotic good, neutral, lawful evil, and chaotic evil. So it took the law and the chaos, but then it broke it into, it's like, well, you know, you could be lawful and still be evil. You know, think of a lawyer,
Yeah,
or somebody, you know,
definitely
something
evil.
like that, right? Or you could be good, but you don't abide by the rule of law, like a Robin Hood. So a chaotic evil character or a chaotic good character. And then later that was expanded into the 9-point alignment system, which everybody's familiar with now. So I think it's an integral part of Dungeons and Dragons. I think I put it up there with, if I'm playing D&D, I'm using alignment, bottom line. And the real reason is because I think it's essential to the experience, just like mapping or tracking torches or doing encumbrance and those sorts of things. I think that is an integral part of the immersive experience, that there is at some level forces which are bigger than us, which are vying for control of the universe. And so it also helps make a clear delineation when, especially when you've got spells for magic users like you know, detect evil, or clerics, I mean, detect evil and detect good, right? I mean, that alignment's almost necessary. Now, that being said, I lean more towards the grim, dark, and the gritty kind of game, and I like moral ambiguity. I think that if you're a right bastard, but you wind up saving the day and becoming a hero through performing good actions, I think that is more, it carries more gravitas for as a piece of character development, right? And so and I hate to do it because I know the guy gets a lot of hate, but let's look at Martin with Game of Thrones, right?
Yeah,
his characters, for the most part, in that series, whether it's a TV show or the books, they're complicated individuals, just like people in real life. The Mother Teresas of the world are few and far between, right? There's not that many of them. Likewise, the Jeffrey Dahmers of the world, thankfully, are also just as rare. So most people fall somewhere on a spectrum in the middle, and they will either be, they may do some bad things sometimes, they may do some good things sometimes. Martin's characters, you know, and I'm thinking in particular of Jaime Lannister. And if you watch this series, you can see this. He starts off as, you just hate the guy. You just hate the guy's, man, this guy's, he's banging his sister, and he's pushing kids out of windows, and he's, you know, and he's, you know, he's just, man, he's a bastard. And then by the end of it, you have a level of sympathy for him because you see his humanity, and that nobody's perfect, and that we all have flaws, that we're all sinners on some level. And it's a lot of it's about perspective. I like moral ambiguity a lot. If I prefer games that don't have alignment. I understand alignment's value. Does it need to be updated? I would actually put alignment in with the way the game stands now. And I haven't played much, if any, 5e. My understanding of things right now is I see it as kind of superfluous. I don't think that it really has mechanically. Why is it there? Does it do anything mechanically? I mean, you would be you could answer that better than I could. I think it's kind of a holdout from the old days, honestly.
It is. I mean, my solution was there's on the table and above the table alignment and morality. So what I mean by that is, like, I have like in my campaign guide, I have an above the table morality where certain acts are always evil. Like if you're murdering a child
Right.
or enslaving people, or
Right.
there's a lot of blood sacrifice that goes along, human blood sacrifice, that is always evil. And I make sure to mention it in the campaign guide, like this is evil because. But then there's other stuff that, and this is where I think a lot of younger players, and it could be the religion thing again, get a little confused because, like, I've got a religion where it's a cosmic entity and it demands blood sacrifices. So, but the people, and it's that God is listed as evil. The adherence to it is evil. Most of the people in the country are evil or maybe neutral at best. But they wouldn't think of themselves as evil. They would think of themselves as good for doing the will of this God. So, I try to make a distinction in there like, hey, people never want to believe that they're evil, even when they're doing evil things. So, you know, you can treat them in that way. Like Jamie Lannister pushing a kid out a window, he didn't see that as evil. He's just protecting him and his sister.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It was. Yeah. Exactly.
but
Um,
there still needs to be an objective, uh, morality that goes above each individual religion or character. And I mentioned several times in there, like you're asked to do things that are, or people might ask you to do things that are completely immoral. And if the characters agree to it because they want to get in favor with these people or whatever, then hey, note that that's an evil act that might change your alignment. That will definitely affect the way that people see you in the future.
right. Yeah. Reputation. Um,
Yep.
I think that games that are darker and more gritty, that games like a Call of Cthulhu, right, where let's be honest, 99% of the time the outcome's not going to be good, um, for the players at least. I think those sorts of games, if you want that sort of grim, dark, gritty,
Mm-hmm.
edgy kind of thing, I think that a, it's best served not having alignment, because then you could get into those moral gray areas and the moral relativism and things like that. I will say, though, that moral relativism, this sort of like, well, he's an evil guy. Well, he doesn't see himself as evil. It can be a bit of a problem if taken to extremes, and I'm talking about over the course of, say, the history of the game, right? And that was
Mm-hmm.
one of the things about Dungeons and Dragons, is there was an objectifiable outside measure, benchmark of, sorry, I just saw somebody in the chat saying I'm in a pickle. I'm not in a pickle. Just watch. There's a benchmark for what's good and evil. And so that's important, because now you can clearly distinguish, regardless of whether or not this guy thinks he's evil, he is.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get into moral relativism and you start to do this idea of like, well, Al Capone thought he was a pretty good dude.
Sure.
He didn't think poorly of himself. Then you wind up with stuff like orcs are racist.
Yes.
Because well, not all orcs are evil. How can you say that? I think if you're going to play a classic traditional fantasy style game where you've got heroics and you've got dragons and you've got elves and you've got orcs, you've got to have a quantifiable measure of good and evil. I think that it's from what it's based on. I mean, crap, look at Tolkien.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, that story works because it is, good versus evil, even if they're just normal people, but basically they're good people and they're fighting against evil. You can look at things like World War II. But then if you want that sort of gritty, darker stuff, you know, the Call of Cthulhu's, the Game of Thrones kind of thing, then I think the moral relativism is fine. I, being a student of philosophy back in the day when I went to college, I like to explore those sorts of themes about what is the state of human nature, what is humanity, and what does that mean, how do we explore that, how do we, you know, and so what is good and what is evil, those are sorts of big conceptual questions.
Yeah. Yeah, and to me that the age thing, I think, is in some ways a lot of the divide between the play styles of people who grew up with the 2014 5e, because now, like let's say you were 14 uh, when that came out, right? That's fairly simple age. So now you'd be 24. So those kind of themes would be pretty relevant to you, whereas perhaps the older folks, you know, like we've already made our decisions on all those kind of moral things. Like once you get into your 50s and whatnot, you're more. I think you're more interested in classic, like, good versus evil, a return to what was, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, my personal progress has kind of been the opposite of that, honestly, because when I was, well, I mean, I was the weird kid, right? So it fits. You know, I started off with my biological mother. One of the things, she had a tremendous influence on my life in a lot of negative ways, but in a few positives. And one of the more positive things that she did was, for whatever reason, she instilled in me a love of reading, and at a very young age, and to think grand thoughts, and to like, you know, I was listening to Tchaikovsky when I was, you know, 8 years old, you know, rather than whatever music was on the radio at the time, lots of times. And a lot of that was because of her. And it makes no sense because she didn't come from that. I mean, we're all a bunch of white trash hillbillies, you know, and so that was not in our wheelhouse. And I don't know why she did that, but she tried to get me to read Ursula Le Guin, the
Earthsea.
No, it wasn't the Earthsea. It was I forget. But anyway, I didn't take to it, right? I mean, I read it because I wanted to make mom happy. And it was fine, but it didn't really capture me. But then she exposed me to a book called The Hobbit. And that one I latched on to. And I probably read that at around 9 years old. And as soon as I got done with that, I found out, oh, this Tolkien guy, he's written some other stuff. Because I went to the library. This is back in the days we didn't have the internet. You got through the old card catalog, you know, and you're looking at the names. It's Tolkien. What else did he write? Oh, Lord of the Rings. What's this? Well, then I discovered Lord of the Rings, and I had no idea what I was getting into. So that was really my first introduction into the world of fantasy, was this epic struggle of good versus evil, Sauron and Gandalf and the Fellowship and all that stuff. And then you have your morally gray character Gollum in there, right? To add a little complexity to it. That's where I started. And then the stories of Conan, which not quite as much good versus evil there. It was a little bit more of a gray area, but still, you know, he's the hero, he's the protagonist. Then I discovered Moorcock, and I read Elric, and that was really probably my first introduction of the anti-hero. And I found that character, Elric, to be much more engaging to me, rather than just sort of this tropish, I'm a warrior fighting for good. It was like, no, wait a minute. Here's a complex character who's really sometimes not a very nice guy, but he kind of tries to be. And it's about his successes and failings in doing so. And then, of course, you've got the Stormbringer thing thrown in there. And then, you know, skip ahead a little bit. Black Company, which is my favorite fantasy series ever, really explores that, because that's, when I was talking about right bastards before, that's what that book is about. You've got a mercenary company, and they are mercenaries. These are not good people. right? These are some pretty nasty dudes who wind up fighting in a battle, and they fight for, is a choice between the lesser of two evils sort of thing, and explores those concepts of how you can still retain some sort of your humanity and try to at least be decent sometimes, but you're really, that everybody fails at that. Martin, of course, with the moral relativism and the different things. So my progression was very the opposite of that. I started off with the epic good versus evil, and now today it's like I really prefer games that are geared towards those sorts of dark gray areas and exploring. It's the idea of whether people are selfish or noble in spirit by nature. Are we truly reflections of divinity, or are we just mammals that evolved out of some sort of primordial ooze and have and we do what we do in order to survive and continue the species? I don't know. I think they're fun concepts to explore. I do think, however, that if you're going to run a game like that, a darker game without alignment, you've got to have the right players.
Yeah.
Not everybody is going to be suited for that. I think that's an important statement to make.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So along with the comment of nice basement you got there, I got to ask, you were the man probably with the most in-depth knowledge of snacks due to professional obligation.
Oh, okay. I thought you were taking the fat guy route.
No. I think I got you beat there. But playing live, certainly for old timers, you had no choice but to play live with other people. Snacks have always been an important part of tabletop role-playing games, especially if you also smoked while you were playing. So what's the best snack?
Oh man,
food to bring to a game. Like, is it pizza? Is it nachos? For you, what do you think?
You're trying to get me to piss off everybody today, man. It's like, what's the best this? What's the best that? It's like, snacks, obviously, like everything else, it's going to be subjective. Honestly, when it comes to D&D, a lot of people, it's going to depend on whether or not you play with minis.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of DMs and people out there is like, get your Cheeto stained fingers off my, 10th level cleric, right?
Anyone who's eaten Cheetos at a D&D game can go straight to hell as far as I'm concerned.
Now, if you're playing Theater of the Mind, like we did back in the day, mostly we didn't really have minis and do a lot of that. Cheetos aren't a problem, right?
But you still get it on the dice, and then that gets on the table.
Well, yeah, but everybody had their own dice. It's like, it's your dice, right? I got Cheetos shit on my dice. It's like,
then you're getting it on my table every time you roll them. No.
Yeah. Ryan, my lead host and my partner on Nerdcognito. I'm going to do a quick plug here. Nerdcognito, check us out. Follow us on X. You can follow us on Rumble, and the Saturday Speakeasy is always Saturdays live, 5 p.m. Eastern. Check it out on Rumble.
And for anyone watching on YouTube, pinned in the chat, there is a link to the Nerdcognito channel over on Rumble.
Yeah. Like the channel. You can hate Ryan David. You can love me. Jack's there. Jack the Lost Lore Scholar. He's a reasonably recent addition. He's got some good takes, and we always try to be entertaining. Saturday Speakies, there's no agenda, no filter, no script. You never know what we're going to talk about. We'll talk about everything from alignment to work issues to snacks or whatever. But anyway,
mugshots,
yeah. Oh, that's right. You were on there for that. I'm sorry about that.
That was fun.
I was just like, Yang's never going to talk to me again after this. Snacks. Classic Lays are always a good one, man. You can't go wrong with the yellow bag Lays. Pretzels are another good one. Anything that doesn't make a mess. Stain the Fingers. Balthazar was in the chat. I think he's still here, hopefully. We used to go over when I was in high school. I went to his house, and he was our DM with me and a bunch of other guys, and we'd go over there every Saturday, and we'd do these 8 to 12-hour sessions of D&D or something. Back when we were young and we didn't have responsibilities like we do. And his mom always made a homemade pizza, the old Chef Boyardee box kit, because they were so cheap they were so cheap back then, right? And she'd cook up a couple of those, and then around lunchtime we'd all eat that. And it's Chef Boyardee pizza, but at the time, man, we were young. It was the best thing ever, man. It was the best thing ever. I loved it. Pizza's always good. I would stay away from things like, I don't know, lobster bisque. And stuff like that. But I hate you. Pizza combos. I remember pizza combos when those first came out, BGC. I remember those when those came out. And yeah, those were. It was like, what is this? This is what sort of deviltry is this? This is awesome.
Pizza combos are my airplane snack of choice.
Do you like the cracker ones or like the pretzel ones?
No, the pretzel ones.
You like the pretzel ones? Yes, I like the cracker ones. I like the cracker ones.
It's fair. It's fair. I mean, they're kind of similar. I just like things extra salty. So
I like salty snacks too. I'm more of a salty than a sweet guy most of the time. Sometimes I get on my little sweet tooth kick, but it doesn't usually last too long. I mean, you can't go wrong with Doritos, of course. Cool Ranch Doritos and Mountain Dew back in the day, baby. If you want to talk the 80s, that was the thing, right? And I still
that'll keep you up for those 12-hour sessions too.
Yeah, I do. I still love my Mountain Dew a little too much sometimes. Right now I'm drinking Coca-Cola, but for those that don't know, I'm in the snack business. I drive a truck for a major snack food company. Believe me, you've heard of them. We're international. We're a Fortune 500 company. And that's my job, and I've been in that business for over 25 years now. That's what I've done. So yeah, I can talk to you all day long about snacks, pretty much.
So are you a fan of? I don't know if it's a 5e invention, but DM's inspiration.
Explain to me what you're talking about, because I know I want to make sure I'm clear on what you're asking.
Okay, there's at least in the 2014 5th edition, they started having DM's inspiration, which could be something like, you did a great job at role playing, so they give you inspiration. Inspiration is either you get to add like you get another die that you could add to any roll you want,
like a D4 or something, or a D6,
or other people play, you get to re-roll something, and you get to choose when you use it. The reason I ask is, as I have seen in the D&D community writ large, bringing snacks to a game will get you DM inspiration.
Well, okay, so DM inspiration really wasn't. It certainly wasn't in the rules.
Yeah, no.
Back in the day, I can't ever remember using an instance of that in my life. I'm torn on that, because again, it's the sort of thing. It's like, hey, if you want to play that way, fine. I don't have a problem with it. I think that bribing the DM, which is essentially, let's be honest. Let's cut the BS.
It's making it official.
It's bribery. Hey, DM, I brought you a 6-pack of your favorite beer, or here's your favorite cookie. I don't know how I feel about that, man. It leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I really don't like it, because I'm coming from the old school. The DM is supposed to be an impartial, objective referee of the game, and so I kind of want to say I don't like it. I don't know.
Okay, that's fair enough. Fair enough.
Of course, if I'm a DM and you want to bring me a gift, I'm not going to say no.
Exactly.
But
Some Johnny Walker Blue Label.
I don't know that you'll get any benefit to your character out of it, but that's just me. We can still be good friends.
That's fair. Yeah, I'm just curious how, what people think of that. To me, that's some of the more interesting parts of like modern gaming. Is it almost seems like I forgot the term for it, like social engineering. Like
Right.
how to have a good table. Like bring
Right.
snacks. Like it's a good way to start.
Well, there's a certain level of, whether being a host and being a guest, right? I mean, I
Mhm.
was raised in an era when you were invited to somebody's house for whatever event, that you always brought something. I mean,
Yeah.
it was just called being polite. Because you wanted to show your gratitude for letting someone invite you into their home, their nest, their castle, right? I mean, our homes are very, they're one of the last safe spaces that we have as individuals. And
Mhm.
particularly if you have a family that lives with you, whether it's, a wife or a partner or whatever, and you have children, you just don't open the door to anybody, And
Right.
so if you get an invitation, then that there's a certain level of implied trust there. And so it's a good thing. It's polite, and it's not really expected, and it doesn't, and it shouldn't be. I don't think that I would turn someone away if they didn't bring a snack or didn't bring a gift, but it's certainly good decorum, I guess, would be the way to put it. And then as a host too, you also need to be, and I've said this before too, when because people talk about session 0
Mhm.
and the the checklists about what's allowed and what's not allowed in a game at a table. And while I'm generally not a huge fan of that, I am on some level. At the same time, I remind myself that if I invite someone over to my house for dinner, I'm probably going to ask if they have any allergies, because I don't want to feed somebody, something cooked in peanut oil if they're allergic to peanuts, or if someone has a
Yeah.
shellfish allergy, I don't want to be serving shrimp scampi, right?
Mhm.
So, because it's a respect thing, I respect you enough as a person to, one, to invite you into my home, and two, I want to make sure that you have a pleasant experience. Um, and I think that there's a certain social media, in particular, in this digital age we're living in, I think it's really damaged a lot of that sort of guest and host relationship.
Mhm.
That really used to be more of a standard, that there was a way things were done, and this was the proper response to things. And this is, whether, there was a decorum, there was a social paradigm that one was expected to follow. And that if you were crass or crude or uncouth, that, odds are you probably would start not getting invited to so many things again in the future. So
Uh, I kind of like this question here. What if the gift bearers work the gift (parentheses bribe) into the role playing? They could be rendering orientations or tithing to their in-game deity. So, is it ethical for the DM to become an in-game deity?
oh um oh, you're laughing because oh man, I don't
I mean, it's silly, but yet at the same time,
well, that's
as a
the thing is,
DM,
yeah, it's maybe a little silly, but it's not entirely out of the question too, right?
yeah.
Because there is this certain aspect in the game that it's, you know I have heard people refer to the DM before as, the god, god
Mhm.
of this game, or god of this
Yeah.
table. So I don't think it's entirely off base to say that. I still think bribery is bad. Just to cut through the BS and get to the answer. It's like,
Yeah.
if you want to offer a gift out of respect, that's one thing. Offering a gift because you expect something in return for your PC, that's really kind of the distinction there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Of what your intent behind the gift, I suppose. If your table's cool with it and you want to work it into your game, and now your cleric can, smite twice as much or whatever, that's
I don't know.
up to you. That's up
to me. This is how you get cults. This is how cults start right here. Cult training.
Yeah. Hey, I need to take some notes, man. I could use the tax exemption status.
So I have a question about the speakeasy. Actually, how did you get started with it? Why did you start it up? Most people who play the games do not have an urge to start a YouTube or a Rumble channel. What made you say, we should really talk about this in front of other people?
How much time we got?
Up to you.
It's a bit of a story, and I'll be as brief as possible. I created, back in the day, Twitter account in 2009. Rarely used it. Right, I couldn't make heads or tails of this thing. Because this was back in Facebook's heyday. Right, everybody was on Facebook, and coming out of MySpace, and so Twitter was there, but I was just like, oh man, I don't like this platform very good. And then Facebook kind of changed and it became much more commercialized. I didn't care for that. So then I started exploring other things, and I discovered that with Twitter, one of the big things about it is it's a fantastic platform, but you have to curate your experience, and it takes time to do so. The things that you interact with and the people that you interact with, then the algorithm will feed you more of that. And so I've always loved role-playing games and D&D and fantasy and all that kind of weird, the weird kid stuff. And so I just started following. It's like, oh, look, here's a D&D guy. I'll follow this guy. Oh, here's the dungeon delver. This guy looks cool. I'm going to follow him, And so I started following a lot of these names and stuff. And so over a few months, then the algorithm kind of got trained that this is what I was looking for. And so it became a much more pleasant experience. So then I would start, every once in a while, I'd drop a comment on somebody's post or whatever and stuff. And I noticed that I got some reactions, and I slowly started to get followers over time. And then I don't even know how it happened, but then I started posting my own takes on things because I thought to myself, I grew up playing. I started playing in '79, and I see some of these people that are the so-called experts or influencers in Dungeons and Dragons or whatever RPG, and I disagree with their takes. So I started putting out some of my own stuff on Twitter, and I started to gain more and more followers. Well, then I got invited by T-Shirted Historian onto his show to be part of his panel one day. And he sent me a private message and was asking me to be on. I'm like, I think you sent a message to the wrong person, because I don't think you're talking to me. I think you meant somebody else. And he was like, no, I meant you. I declined that first one, but I went the next weekend. And I really enjoyed having just a sort of informal discussion about different things. And that's where I met Ryan David, because he had joined the show shortly before me. And so he was on that panel. And very quickly, Ryan and I figured out that we played off each other really well, that we had a really good chemistry on screen. And then there was some behind the scenes drama that happened. And Ryan and I we weren't booted out. I wouldn't go so far as to say that, but there was kind of a rift there that happened. And so Ryan and I kind of didn't exactly feel welcome on that channel anymore, through no fault of T-Shirt. It was just the situation. And I'm not going to disparage anybody on here. T-Shirt's a great guy, and he runs a good show. But we had that time slot open. And I mean, I had been on the show regularly enough at that point. It's like every Saturday at this time we're doing this. So we're sitting around and we're just chatting one night online, just me and him. And he was like, F it, let's do a stream. And so we just spontaneously, like within 10 minutes, created a stream, and we did our own thing. And it wasn't even called the Speakeasy then. I think we called it Pre-Cognito. and and we just did this random stream, and wonder of wonders, we had people watch and we had people in the chat, which for a first time stream was kind of unheard of. Now let me backtrack a little bit, and I will say that before that happened, Ryan was down a person on the main show, the big podcast, which you can find on any podcast provider of your choice. Just simply search Nerdcognito. And he needed a third co-host. There was him and there was Bert. He had an empty slot, and he asked me to do that. So I had joined that. That was probably a couple of months before Ryan and I went off and did the speakeasy thing on our own. Then it turned into the speakeasy, and it became a thing, and the rest, as they say, is history. So
nice.
Yeah.
And so do you guys have plans to push it further? So recently you did add Jack, who foolishly does not follow me on Twitter.
He doesn't? Well, I'll correct that.
He does not. But are you guys any other things, any special episodes, or do you think like it's the sort of like the format has really gelled and it's pretty solid, or are you guys still in like that experimental phase?
We're always trying to read the room, right? And so there's one of the things a lot of people might not realize is that with me and Ryan and Jack in particular is that there is a lot of discussion behind the scenes. We talk to each other. I have Ryan's personal number. He has mine. We call each other and talk sometimes, right? I don't have Jack's because he's overseas and I don't want to pay those charges. But yeah. I do have other ways of reaching Jack, and I know Jack and Ryan talk sometimes too. And we talk about a lot of things, whether it's just day to day, like, man, today sucked, I need to vent, or we talk about the show and the future of the show. Now, when I originally started with Nerdcognito, it was audio podcast only. And that was our thing. We were, arguably the largest audio only podcast for our particular niche. And then we did the speakeasy thing, and we found out that very quickly that it's like, okay, we can get good traction with video. We have recently, within just the last couple of weeks, we simulcast the audio show. It was before it was just an audio podcast. Now it is available in audio and video. So you can still get the audio podcast like you're used to on your podcast provider of your choice. But you can also go to Rumble and you can watch the live show. So we're kind of doing the Joe Rogan thing, right?
Right.
You can get it in either way, because some people prefer video. Some people honestly do. So we've expanded into that. As far as the speakeasy goes, there's no plans to change the speakeasy. It seems to be a formula that's working really well. We want to grow it some more. We'd like to get some subs, and we'd like to get some more people following and getting in the chat and getting active with us. We get pretty good views being on Rumble, as far as the total replays and that sort of thing. We occasionally put out specials. Just this week, we put out me and Ryan put out a special episode. It's a special review of Rob Kuntz's Into the Wild Blue Yonder module that he wrote for Arnicon 2. So it was specifically a module that Rob Kuntz wrote for Arnicon, which our good friend Secrets of Blackmore is heavily involved with, the celebration of Dave Arneson and the hobby in general. So you can check that out. We'll do other special episodes from time to time. We don't have really anything. There is something coming here in about a week, but I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it. So,
okay,
we might have a big surprise on the 15th. If you follow Nerdcognito on X, I guarantee you details will be forthcoming sometime this week, probably midweek or no later than Thursday, I would suspect.
As everyone should follow Nerdcognito on X, as well as at Dying Breed TT. And you should go to Rumble, where if you are watching this on YouTube,
Yeah.
go check out the pinned comment and the chat, and it should be down in the description to the video as well. You can find the Rumble links to the Nerdcognito Speakeasy. And as you mentioned, just go to Spotify, Apple Music. YouTube's trying to start a thing now too.
I mean, if it's a major podcast provider, we're there. You just look for Nerdcognito. Yeah, we're out.
And oh, and Elvin Maiden.
Oh, okay. I didn't see that it was public yet. I mean, the last I knew, it was still behind the scenes, so I hadn't seen that. I haven't seen that. Details are up. Yeah, we're okay. So we're going to be giving away some stuff, some free stuff, and some good stuff. Like for people that love RPGs, you're going to want to be there. And that'll be, but it's only 2 live viewers in the chat. So so go create a Rumble account if that's what it takes, and give us that sub. I'm sure there'll be stipulations on it. You probably got a sub. You probably got a like. I haven't talked to Ryan, so thanks, Emmy, for stealing my thunder. But yeah, we're gonna be doing. It should be a fun time. It should be a fun time. Valentine's Day. We're gonna be showing our love to the Nerdcognito Nation out there.
Nice. And speaking of subbing and liking, if you have not subbed to my YouTube channel, at Yang Yan Jiao 4 on YouTube, I am also, I think I'm Yang Yan Jiao 4 on Twitter. Am I? Yes, I am. Yang Yan Jiao 4 on Twitter.
I don't know. I followed you for a while, so I don't know.
Go sub to me there too. So Kyle,
yeah,
it is getting to be about that time.
Yeah, you got a game coming up here in a little bit, buddy. You got to go fight some mutants or whatever.
I do. So for anyone who wants to see a live play tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern, myself, Kanik, who's been in the heckling from the chat, we will be playing traditional Gamma World. Over on the Dungeon Delvers channel. I just popped a link in the chat, so go find us there. And next week I will have guests. I don't know who, because no one is confirmed yet, but there will be people. For sure, people.
Somebody will be here.
And everyone should hang on for February 22 when the Nerd Council of Doom.
It's a good show.
We have our new channel, which is on YouTube at the Nerd Council of Doom. It is on before the Speakeasy, so you've got like 6 hours of awesome tabletop talk on a Saturday. You should definitely check in for that. Yeah, I don't know, Kanik. We just might die in Gamma World. Even though we're starting something new, there's a good chance we'll die.
It's a fun time. Delver's a good guy, too. He runs good games.
His games are excellent. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. And hopefully we'll see you all soon over on the Dungeon Delvers channel for some Gamma World.
Thanks for having me
Kyle,
on.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And good night.